Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Today, while I'm here examining a story, I'm trying to navigate traffic in Need for Speed. And I have to say, these stories really leave a lasting impression. A search and rescue volunteer, lost underground for 3 days. Something that should never have happened. I don't want to say too much. Just follow me through this story. Let's get started. 3 days in the dark. When I was 8, my older brother Elliot went missing. Losing your brother at 8? That kind of wound never heals. And this man spent his entire life trying to close that wound. He was only 13, but there's something about older siblings that leaves you in awe. One day, he just didn't come home. They searched for days, but found no trace of him. I was too young to understand what was happening, and so I had to sit in my room playing with my Legos, hoping the doorbell would ring and they'd tell me everything was okay. That kind of doorbell ring never came. They couldn't find him. As days turned into weeks, the search teams stopped. But even after everyone else had gone home, I kept looking for him. On my way home from school, I'd take the long way. I'd go down streets I'd never looked down before. In my pocket, I had a crumpled map with circles drawn around the places I knew he liked, and I was determined to check them all. People don't just vanish. That's not how things work. But after a while, there were no more places left to check, no more circles to draw, and Elliot was still missing. The last thing he'd said to me was, "See you later, alligator." I don't think you can ever fully come to terms with something like that. Now, once you're faced with an impossible question, you look for answers in everything. I became truly fascinated by puzzles and brain teasers, not because they were fun, but because leaving unsolved mysteries gave me an immense sense of dread. I was a brilliant student and one of the top debaters in the debate club. Again, not because I enjoyed it, but because I hated not knowing. As I got a little older, I started volunteering with search and rescue teams. I introduced myself to the local law enforcement and told them I'd gladly volunteer. I thought that if I couldn't find Elliot, maybe finding someone else's missing sister or brother would be the next best thing. At least it might help me sleep at night. I know there are many people who say, "Get over it," but there's a limit to what you can get over. I'm in my early 30s now. You can forget their faces and the hopes you nurtured as they grew up. But you can't forget the impact they left on you. You can't forget your own experiences or the scars left by those uncertain years. Even if I never hear the name Elliot again, I'll never forget the feeling that the course of my life suddenly took a sharp left turn. I want to talk about a search team I joined a few years ago. By that point, I'd been part of dozens of organized search teams. I knew some of the people involved and was familiar with the equipment. I took time off work and arrived early. I put on my high-visibility vest and gloves and grabbed my backpack. A walkie-talkie, water, a flashlight, a few chocolate bars, a first aid kit, and a waterproof bag. I hadn't found anyone in a search like this before, but that didn't mean I never would. You have to believe in the best-case scenario. We weren't given a GPS, which surprised me. It turned out we were going underground, so we were given filtered masks to protect against harmful dust and poor air quality. The missing person was a 17-year-old urban explorer. I live in a city with a metro system, and he was exploring an abandoned station on the outskirts of the city. The family had been notified of a social media post showing the approximate location, but the details were unclear. Power had been restored to this section of the tunnels to aid the search. Most of the emergency lights were designed to last for years, so navigating the area shouldn't be too much of a problem. We split into sections and teams, and were instructed to follow only the lit corridors and passages. However, as since some parts of the station had been abandoned mid-construction, there would be unfinished dark sections. We were ordered to report any such areas we found and request further instructions. And with that, we set off. Not being able to see the abandoned station platform had annoyed me a bit. That thing was supposed to be massive. Instead, I was assigned to one of the maintenance tunnels. This area was actually designed to house heating pipes, but the pipes had never been installed. Instead, there were lines on the wall and occasional holes in the ceiling. It was clear they were surprised the project had been halted. I found an abandoned toolbox next to a half-installed door. There were still some personal belongings inside. I was part of a 4-person team. We moved slowly and methodically through the corridors, calling out to the missing person as we went. We stayed within our search area and maintained radio contact with the coordinator. Since we sometimes came across rooms that were almost completely empty, it was hard to figure out what all these spaces were supposed to be. Since we couldn't fully describe what anything was, it was hard to explain what we were checking. Was this a control room or some kind of utility junction? Where exactly was it supposed to be on the map? We came to an unusually long corridor that split into 3 directions. We decided to split up while staying within earshot of each other. I went all the way to the end of the corridor and stopped in front of a heavy door. The door was almost entirely black and as heavy as cast iron. I got the impression it was some kind of security door, perhaps leading to an underground shelter. I called out to the others in my team but got no response. While struggling with the door, I reported the situation over the radio. Inside, it was pitch black. The lights were out. "I'm looking at a dark room at the end of the corridor." "C, I think. The one on the right, the second one on the right, past the boilers." "Don't lose radio contact and leave the door open," the operator replied. "Don't go so far that you can't see the light." "Roger that." I entered the room. The room was slightly smaller than the corridor. When I stood upright, the ceiling brushed the top of my head. When I balanced on my tiptoes, I could feel the strap of my mask touching the ceiling. I tried to figure out what this space was for, but I couldn't make sense of it. There was a single entry point, and there were no holes in the wall for cable management or ventilation. This place was completely sealed off. I tapped the radio again, swinging my flashlight back and forth. "There's a corridor leading inward," I said. "Is anyone watching my back?" "Yes. There's someone right outside," the operator reassured me. "You go ahead." I took a few more steps and held my flashlight toward the end of the corridor. The light didn't reach the end. The tunnel was so long it made me feel dizzy, as if it were pulling me in for a moment. An unsettling thought crossed my mind. Maybe this is what it feels like to get lost, facing this endless darkness with no way back. Maybe Elliot had thought the same thing once. I didn't like it. I was only a few steps from the door, but I decided not to take the risk. I turned and started to leave. And just then, the door closed. At first, I didn't understand what had happened. A door closing isn't usually a big deal. Maybe it was misaligned or there was a draft. That wasn't the case here. This door was made of solid metal. It wouldn't close on its own by accident. I grabbed the handle, turned it and pulled, but it didn't budge. I couldn't even push it down. "I'm stuck," I reported over the radio. "The door closed. I can't open it." "Sorry, these things happen," the operator said with a sigh. "Some of these doors' hinges have rusted and seized up. Stay by the door. Someone will come get you. Keep your flashlight on." I stayed by the door for at least 20 minutes, knocking on it occasionally, hoping someone would answer. They didn't. After a while, my flashlight started flickering. It was way too early for the batteries to die. "Okay. The lights are going out," I said. "Someone needs to get me out of here right now." "They're having trouble finding your door," the operator replied. The far end of the right-hand corridor, Section C, past the boiler room. Is that what you said? Right. There's no door here. There's an open door frame and something that looks like a cabinet, but no door. That's impossible. Look, you might have misunderstood the instructions. If you pass by the boilers, you could be in Section C or D. There are parallel corridors. In that case, just follow the right-hand wall until you reach the other side. There's already another search team there. The wall on the right, the other corridor. Got it. Holding the nearly dead flashlight tightly, I followed his instructions. When I reached the tunnel that seemed to stretch endlessly, the light finally went out. It was pitch black around me. Even if I closed my eyes, nothing would change. Being in that kind of darkness disorients you so much that you start to imagine how easy it is to lose your way. You even wonder if you might have actually lost your way. But I pressed my hand against the wall and didn't veer to the right. Is it far? I asked. I can't hear their voices. You'll have to walk a bit. There should be pipes running overhead about halfway down the path. Let me know as soon as you hear the sound of running water. I couldn't hear anything but the echo of my own breath in the corridor. But if there was water flowing down below, I wouldn't miss it for the world. I pressed my hand against the smooth concrete wall and continued moving forward step by step. You have to go slowly, because even the slightest difference in elevation could send you crashing face first to the ground. When you're exposed to this kind of prolonged darkness, your mind starts filling in the blanks. You begin to imagine what the space around you looks like. It plays tricks on you. For example, I started imagining that I was running my hand over wallpaper instead of concrete. It was smooth enough that you could fool yourself while walking. But if you're perceiving the world only through your fingertips, you can imagine yourself anywhere. The wallpaper in the house where I grew up had a rough paper texture. It wasn't hard to imagine being there, sneaking out to the bathroom in the middle of the night. To better understand what I was touching, I finally took off my gloves. And I came to a crossroads and still hadn't heard the sound of running water. I turned on the radio and reported the situation. "There's a junction here," I said. "Should I turn right or go straight?" "A junction?" the operator asked. "There shouldn't be a junction. Are you sure?" "Yes, there's a junction. Straight ahead or one more right." "Wait," the voice mumbled. "Wait. Wait. Wait. Don't say anything. Is the ceiling really low?" "Yes." "Why didn't you say so? Damn it, that changes everything." I could hear them talking to someone in the background. They'd forgotten to take their hands off the buttons. Then they turned back to me. This is going to get complicated. It turned out there were 3 more rooms matching my description, and none of them were in the sections I'd described. I must have strayed far off course. And I needed to walk around to gather data to determine which room I was in, but this proved harder than they'd anticipated. For instance, one corridor was supposed to lead to a junction, while another was supposed to lead to a grate in the ceiling. However, the room at the end of the corridor wasn't finished, so it wasn't clear what it was supposed to be. I had to go deeper to figure out where I was. I occasionally came across staircases, but they didn't lead anywhere. There were supposed to be entrances from the street, but these had long since been filled in and paved over. Still, I had to climb each one to make sure I hadn't missed any. The mask on my face felt increasingly suffocating, as if my body were crammed into a box. Even though I could move my arms, I could feel that claustrophobic stone structure against my chest. And it pounded in a rhythm opposite to my rising heartbeat. If I paid too much attention to it, I wouldn't be able to breathe. I pushed myself into another corridor, but found myself stuck in a dead end. In the wall was a round hole large enough for someone my height to pass through. "This is good. This is good, the operator reassured me. This means there's a space for heating. If my calculations are correct, that means you're in one of these two corridors. You need to go inside. No way. It slopes down about 1.5 meters and either goes straight or goes up. If it goes up, you can go straight to the top. I can have someone meet you there. If it goes straight, you have to keep going, then turn left, and then keep going again. That will bring you to the same corridor as me. Either way, so you have to keep going. I lifted one knee and felt along the edges of the hole. It was too small for me to crawl on all fours. I had to get my body inside and pull myself forward with my palms. The concrete was so smooth I couldn't grip it with my fingers, gloves or no gloves. My gear kept catching on the edges. I paused to drink some water and splashed a little on my face to steel myself. 5 feet, then up or forward. That was all there was to it. I crawled in centimeter by centimeter. I had to stay calm. When I tried to take a deep breath, I could feel my gear clanging against the walls. It didn't hurt, but it constantly reminded me of how isolated I was. My heart was pounding in my ears. There was nothing to distract me. Not even the slightest echo. I felt the tunnel slope slightly downward. Not much, but enough that pushing myself upward would be impossible. If I kept going, I wouldn't be able to get back out. Unless, of course, I found a way to turn back. "Are you sure it's only a few meters?" I asked. "Are you absolutely sure?" There are only 2 rooms with that kind of ventilation shaft. No matter which one you're in, or which direction you're coming from, you'll be out in no time. I swallowed hard. I could feel the sweat stinging my eyes. I wanted to throw away our masks as if that were what was holding me back. But I had to act rationally. I pushed myself forward and began sliding downward. The tunnel leveled out. I looked for an exit leading upward but couldn't find one. This meant we'd pinpointed exactly where I was, and I had to keep moving forward. My palms were so dusty I could barely grip anything. I had to roll onto my back and use the rubber soles of my shoes to brace myself, which allowed me to push myself backward. I could feel the heat of my breath condensing on the tunnel walls. Then the tunnel opened up. It happened so suddenly that I lost my balance and tumbled headfirst out into the open. I took a strange tumble and slammed hard into my left hip and shoulder. It wasn't a long fall, but it was long enough to twist something. I didn't want to imagine what the bruise would look like. I grabbed my radio and clung to it tightly to save my life. "I'm out," I groaned. "I've reached a room." "There's only one way forward," the operator said. "Go forward, then turn left and go forward again. Let me know when you see the light. I'm right at the other end." "Is that it? Is that really it?" "There's no other way." I stood up. I brushed the dust off my clothes and checked my equipment. Everything was in place. Everything was going to work out. I followed the instructions. I moved forward and turned left. At the next intersection, I kept moving straight ahead, checking with the operator again and again, with every step. They told me it would happen as soon as I turned the corner. It was just a matter of a few minutes. At one point, he said he'd tap a pipe with an adjustable wrench and that I'd be able to hear it at any moment. Now, I just had to keep going straight until I reached a door. I was running with my hand pressed against the wall to keep my balance. Every 3 meters on the wall, there were small gaps where there should have been openings for pipes. I walked, felt the gap, walked, felt the gap, over and over. Then I brushed my hand against someone's face. You open eyes, a nose, teeth, and hair. I stopped and turned around. My hand was trembling as if I'd touched a flame. "Is anyone there?" I asked. There was no answer. I hesitated in my mind, trying to decide whether I should go back and check again or keep going. Maybe it was the missing person? After all, we were still looking for someone. The search hadn't been called off. I took a few steps back and carefully reached out with my right hand. My fingers, as if anticipating the warmth I could imagine, waited to touch the skin. But when I reached further, all I felt was concrete. There was no one there. I checked everywhere thoroughly, but there was nothing. Still, I heard a faint metallic sound when something stuck to my shoe. A small key. A sunflower-like motif was engraved on it. Maybe a blue sunflower. I put it in my pocket next to my first aid kit and continued on my way, making sure I didn't lose my way. When I reached the end of the hallway, I reached for the door. "Okay, here we are," I said. "I can't hear you, but I'm at the end of the hallway. There's a door there. Open it, and I'll send someone over to you." I felt around with my hand to find the handle, but I couldn't find it. I checked that wall 3 times, every inch of it. It was a dead end. "There's nothing here," I gasped. "There's nothing here!" "Calm down. It should be on your left." "There's nothing on my left. Nothing on my right either. It's a dead end. Damn it!" I hit the radio against my head and heard a click. Not like something breaking, but like something clicking into place. I turned the radio over in my hand and felt the back. And the battery cover had popped open slightly. That blow had snapped it back into place. I opened it to make sure I'd closed it properly. There was no battery in the radio. Wait a second. If there's no battery, who was talking? I don't even want to ask myself that question. I checked twice. 3 times. There was no battery. "Hello?" I asked. "Operator?" I brought the radio to my lips and tapped the receiver a few times. There was no sound, just the click of the plastic. "Hello?" No answer. I slumped against the wall and paused for a moment to collect myself. This didn't make sense. Even when I'd hit the radio against my head, the battery cover was still closed. I would have heard the 2 batteries fall out. I couldn't have lost them earlier, because then the operator wouldn't have been able to talk to me in the hallway. Something didn't add up. I ran my hands along the floor to check if the batteries were there somewhere. They weren't. But I couldn't just sit there in the dark and wait. I had to do something. I had to try something. This was just another puzzle to solve. There's always a solution, and sometimes you just have to make the best of the cards you're dealt. By then, I'd mapped out a mental blueprint. Years of trying to solve things had trained me to gather and store information. It was like counting the alphabet backward. I just had to follow the order I'd learned. I decided to go back and try to reach where I'd started. I went back to the hole in the wall and climbed inside. Climbing upward would be difficult, but I was confident I could do it. I crawled forward, stretching out my hands, but I felt the tunnel sloping downward. As suddenly I stopped. My head was spinning. This was impossible. I was crawling downward. It couldn't be possible to go any lower from here. Crawling a bit further, I reached out my arm. This couldn't be where I'd come from. Were there 2 separate tunnels? That was the only explanation. I forced myself to turn back, but I couldn't find a second opening in the wall. I must have lost my way somewhere, taken a wrong turn, I thought. Instead of turning right at a fork, I must have gone straight. Something like that. I needed to map out my surroundings slowly and methodically, room by room, corridor by corridor. It's easy to doubt yourself in the dark. You have nothing to rely on but your thoughts and impressions, and these can easily be misinterpreted. This can be difficult even in a familiar environment. Just ask anyone who's had to go to the bathroom during a power outage. Without light or the ability to navigate, I was in an uncharted area, somewhere deep underground. I must have wandered for hours. I mapped out a 2-pronged corridor leading to 3 rooms and 4 dead-end alleys. There was no door, just a single hole in the wall leading to a tunnel. Yes, I checked again. The tunnel extended downward. No, I didn't go that way. Finally, I reached one of the small rooms and folded my high-visibility vest to use as a pillow. I drank some water, but saved some for later and ate a piece of chocolate. The others were probably looking for me right now. I tried not to think about the radio. It was part of the puzzle that was making me queasy. No matter how I turned that thought around, I couldn't reach a logical conclusion. So if it had been empty from the start, the problem was me. If it wasn't empty until the last click of the battery cover, there should have been batteries on the floor. I couldn't find any, but that didn't mean they weren't there. Still, I had no clear answer. In the end, I spent the night there. It's hard to sleep in that kind of darkness. After a while, you can't tell if your eyes are open or closed. You don't know if you're sleeping or not. The line between fantasy and reality is as thin as paper, and you start to think that everything you see in your dream is actually there. There could be someone in the room, just a few inches away, and there was no way to know for sure. For the first time in years, I thought of Elliot. I didn't just think about the fact that he was gone. I thought of him as a person. And I imagined how he might have felt during those last few hours or days. Was there someone with him? Or had he simply vanished into the darkness? He and I had always been so much alike. We'd probably have been thinking the same thing in our final moments. And if this was one of my final moments, I was afraid. He would have been afraid too. I tried not to think about it. There was no way to know for sure, and imagining the worst didn't do anyone any good. He might have run away. He might have run off with a pretty girl and be living in a hippie commune. He might show up 20 years from now. You can't know the future, but for some reason, a voice inside me felt as if it knew. It knew he had gone to a dark place from which he could never return. Maybe the next day, maybe just a few hours later, but at some point, I got up. I decided to check the tunnel again. It must have been some kind of misunderstanding. I drank my last sip of water and followed the map in my mind. The layout was different. There were more rooms and shorter corridors. If you turned left twice, there were a few stairs. There was a larger room with a round base for draining the liquid. I'd passed through the same corridor twice, and I could have sworn their lengths were different. I counted my steps, and the result was always the same. But one time, it took a minute to get through, while the next time, it took 2 minutes. I felt like I was losing my mind. Every time I tried to make sense of the place clearly, it seemed to shift and transform. It was as if it were incomplete from multiple angles. It felt like an approach to space and dimension. And after walking through the same rooms a third time, I took a break because I still couldn't make sense of it. I leaned back, tapping the back of my head against the wall as if trying to come up with a good idea. Instead, I picked up the radio, tapped the receiver, and turned the knobs. It was just a plastic brick now, no different from a paperweight. I checked the back, opened the battery compartment. It was still empty. Then, a voice. There's a way out, you know. The crackling sound came from the radio, but there was something in it that resonated within me, as if the echo were tickling the depths of my mind. "You're not real," I muttered. "I'm hallucinating." "Are you sure? This is like a sensory deprivation tank. If your senses stop receiving input, your brain starts sending out random signals to keep them occupied. Otherwise, it sort of atrophies." "So am I just a random brain signal?" "I suppose so." "Interesting," the voice continued. "So that means everything I say is an expression of you." "No, just random noise. You could have been a cat meowing or a leaf blowing in the wind." "Well, how do I come across to you? Try to classify me. Try to understand me. Who am I?" The voice belonged to a man. It was hard to tell his age from the radio, but I guessed he wasn't young or old. He was an adult or middle-aged, with a slight accent similar to mine. That was an interesting choice. "Where does that accent come from?" I asked. "Wherever you want it to come from. A nice escape. I wonder why I imagined you that way." "Maybe you're trying to say something." "Why would I care about some random person with an accent?" "Maybe I'm not just a random person." I turned the radio away, closed my eyes, and shook my head. "Don't do that," I whispered. "Don't say things like that." I wandered in the dark for a while, trying to make sense of what was happening around me. The number of steps on the stairs was different. The hallway turned right instead of left. The ceiling was lower, and the slope of the floor in the large room was steeper. I thought I felt a doorknob, but when I turned back, I realized it was just the handle of a missing pipe. During that time, I spoke aloud and occasionally received responses from the radio. I knew it wasn't real, but it kept random thoughts from turning into something rotten inside me, and I had to focus on the task ahead and find a way forward. There had to be a way forward. There's no such thing as an impossible space. The operator wasn't trying to get inside my head or make exaggerated claims. Most of the time, he was just listening. He'd occasionally comment when I said something wrong or made a bad decision. And when I returned to that same room I'd been in countless times before, pulling my hair out in frustration, that voice rang out loud and clear. "Would you like a suggestion? You're not real." "Then what's the harm?" "That doesn't make sense," I snapped. "I'm talking to a wall. Anything that comes out of this is at best random. Do you have a better idea?" I flung the radio across the room. It smashed against the opposite wall. I heard the plastic clatter as it rolled down the sloped floor and gathered in a small grate in the middle of the room. Some small pieces slipped through the grate. I pressed my hands over my ears to gather my thoughts. "Are you done?" The voice wasn't coming from the radio anymore. It was echoing inside me, as if my bones were picking up a radio signal. I didn't know what to say. Before I could open my mouth, the voice answered for me. "Then let's begin." Nothing else came to mind. My mouth was dry, and my head was spinning from the prolonged stress. I could feel this sense of exhaustion seeping into my bones, making my movements slow and clumsy. I was dragging my feet and no longer even brushing against the walls. If I stumbled or bumped into something, it was my fault. It wasn't a problem. The operator made a few suggestions. And turn left instead of going forward. Stay to the right. 3 steps back, a sharp left. When I managed to strain enough to filter out that voice from the screams echoing in the depths of my mind, I did as I was told. And with slow but steady steps, I began to notice that things were changing. There were different rooms, and the air was thickening. There was a strange smell in the air. The concrete started to feel different, more porous. Maybe this wasn't better, but at least it was something new. I started hearing strange sounds. There were machines above my head. Compressed air was flowing from an unseen place. Running water. "Why did you bring me here?" I asked. "You tricked me into coming here." "You were already tricked," the voice replied. "I was trying to get you out of here." "Hey, but he's changing everything." "You said I could get in and that there were people supporting me." "I was trying to comfort you while I figured this out." "What were you trying to figure out? What are we doing here?" "He wants you to go in a certain direction. Haven't you ever wondered why you're always drawn to look at the places you shouldn't? He wants you to find him, and now you're very close to doing that. And believe me, you don't want that." "Why?" I said, shrugging. "Why wouldn't I want that?" "Because I know what happens when you go too far." when you can't turn back. Things like that want to be found in deep, dark places. I tapped the side of my head as if to get a better signal in my mind, as if that could somehow filter out that nonsense. I came to another fork in the road, left and right. I turned right as the operator's voice sounded in my ear again. "Go the other way," he said. "You're getting too close. You need to turn back." I didn't listen. I kept moving forward until I heard something. There were voices ahead, voices of people talking. My heart was racing as I ran forward. "Please, turn back," the operator said. "Turn back right now." I could hear people talking. I turned a corner and saw a door for the first time in days. I could see a door. A faint light was coming from beneath it, and I could hear people moving around in the other room. I ran to the door and pushed the handle down. Someone on the other side was calling out, asking if anyone was there. "The key!" the operator pleaded. "I left you a key!" I pushed the handle down and stopped. I reached into my pocket with my right hand and felt the key was still there. I'd completely forgotten about it. "There's a way out, but this isn't it. I promise you this isn't it. Please don't do this. Please don't go that way." "Why?" I whispered. "They're right there." "This isn't real. I made the same mistake. Don't. Go in. Don't go in." My hand remained on the handle. Someone insisted I open the door. Someone wanted me to take a look. They were laughing, relieved, telling me how happy they were to have finally found me. But something felt off. I took a step back. "Open the door on your side," I said aloud. "It's not working." There wasn't even the slightest movement in the doorknob. They made up excuses. One had their hands full. Another said the door wouldn't open on their side. One pretended not to hear me. As I traced the lines of the sunflower carved into my thumb, the key in my pocket began to feel heavier. This was real. It was a real thing. Whatever was on the other side of that door wasn't real. I took a step back, and the moment I did, the light behind the door vanished. The sounds faded, and the hallway suddenly fell into a deadly silence. "What should I do?" I whispered. "What should I do?" the operator whispered back. "Go to the other side and don't stop for anything." I turned around as a door creaked behind me and ran. I heard wet skin hitting the concrete floor, stumbling forward with an odd gait. I went straight, then made a sharp right turn. The air was growing thicker, starting to heat up. I ran my hand along the right wall, but the wall had shifted. The concrete had become warm and soft, like beach sand. And then the grains grew finer until it felt like mud. It felt like running your hand over raw chicken. "It wants you to stop," said the operator. "It's trying to distract you. Keep going." The corridor was narrowing and widening like a living, breathing entity. Sometimes the floor seemed to roll as if trying to swallow me. I could feel it tilting at different angles, making the path winding and twisting. One moment, I was moving forward. The next, the corridor tilted upward, and I was scrambling up a makeshift ladder using the protrusions on the floor. Then I was falling backward, clinging on for dear life as I was tossed from side to side. Meanwhile, something down below was waiting for me to fall. Something that had come out of that door and was tired of playing games. It was as if I'd gotten soaked when I reached a dead end. And there was a sticky substance covering the wall, but I could push against it. It was like trying to pop a soap-soaked balloon. Using the scissors from the first aid kit, I managed to cut a hole big enough for my hand and tore it completely open. As I did this, everything spun again when something screamed in pain, not with sound, but with movement, spasms, and heat. I could feel the compressed air pressing against my eardrums, which was throwing off my balance. There was a door at the end of the corridor. It was chained. "There it is," said the operator. Take the key, and go." It was coming down the corridor, straight toward me. It was so fast. How could it be moving that fast? I reached for my key and looked around for a lock. There was one. I inserted the key into the lock, turned it, and pulled. There was a click, and the chain fell to the ground. As I ran to open the door and step through it, I turned around for a moment to close it behind me. As I did so, I saw something staring at me from the darkness, something with milky white skin, dull eyes, and the savage mouth of a spineless predator. The door closed, and I took a step back, catching my breath. There was light here. The operator was on the line, but his voice barely reached me. I could hear static-like crackles. It was as if I were just slightly out of range. "Just keep going," he said. "It's not too far. I'll handle it from here." "What about you?" I asked. "Are you still there?" "I went the wrong way." I paused for a moment and looked behind me. The light was dim, but my eyes were still trying to adjust. I couldn't focus. "Is that you?" I asked. "I mean, is it really you?" There was a brief pause as the world came into view. The operator thought for a moment, then sighed. "Whatever," he said. "See you later." I followed the sound of the machine and walked straight onto a platform. People heading to work early in the morning saw me emerging from a maintenance tunnel, and a janitor came over to me. What I said at that moment made no sense at all. By the time law enforcement arrived to take me in, I had lost consciousness. It took them hours to identify me, and I wasn't much help. I'd been wandering around there for nearly 3 full days. I was dehydrated. They'd found the missing city explorer and had redirected the rescue effort toward me. They were trying to figure out exactly where I'd veered off the main path. No one could find the black door I'd described or the corridor where the door was supposed to be. Since nothing matched my description, following my trail seemed impossible. They couldn't explain what I'd experienced. My clothes were coated with a thin layer of hydrochloric acid and potassium chloride mixed with a substance resembling stomach acid. It was as if I'd been walking through the inside of a massive diluted stomach. There were interviews, surveys, and even a short article in a local newspaper. Most people wanted to talk about the fear of getting lost in the dark and what it does to the mind. About a week later, the novelty of the incident wore off, and I went back to work as if nothing had happened. I still volunteer for search and rescue missions from time to time. Of course, I'm a bit more cautious now. Yeah, but you can't change who you are overnight. Still, I think something has changed. These days, I ask different questions, and I'm not sure I even want an answer. I can't say for certain what I did or what I experienced during those 3 days, but I know what I heard. I know I wasn't alone. And in those rare moments when I think all of this is just some fake, meaningless nonsense I've concocted in the depths of my mind, I look at the top drawer of my nightstand. There, hidden in the darkness, is a small key with a sunflower engraved on it, left there for me by someone. That key is real. No one can explain this, and Elliot's last words, "See you later." The operator's last words were also, "See you later." That's no coincidence. Okay, this story really shook me up. That key is still there, sitting in the drawer. And that voice. Was it Elliot? We don't know. Maybe we'll never know. I'm looking forward to your comments. What do you think? Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next video.